This morning, we're continuing our sermon series on the songs of our faith, where we've been discussing various hymns that have shaped us throughout the years. And today we'll be looking at one of my personal favorites, Here I Am, Lord. One of the interesting things about this hymn is that it actually switches the point of view throughout the song. The stanzas are all written as if God is speaking them. And then the refrain is our response back to God. So the song ends up kind of being this conversation between us, the singers, and God. The first stanza states, and remember this is the voice of God speaking, I, the Lord of sea and sky, I've heard my people cry. All who dwell in dark and sin, my hand will save. I who made the stars of night, I will make their darkness bright. Who will bear my light to them? Whom shall I send? And then comes our response in the refrain, Here I am, Lord. Is it I, Lord? I've heard you calling in the night. I will go, Lord, if you lead me. I will hold your people in my heart. The words in this refrain are taken almost verbatim from the scripture we've read this morning. The prophet Isaiah has this powerful vision. And at the end of the vision, we hear the voice of the Lord asking in verse 8 of our scripture, Whom shall I send? Who will go for us? And Isaiah says, Here I am. Send me. It's a simple question and answer, one that brings to mind an image of a teacher asking a classroom full of young students for a volunteer. You can almost see a little Isaiah, hands stretched as high as he can in the air, reaching out, shouting, Ooh, here, send me, send me. But that's not the entire story. For prior to Isaiah's enthusiastic response at the end of his vision, he actually struggles deeply with his own human faults and failings. As soon as he sees the bright flaming creatures, kind of like a fiery choir calling out in verse 3, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. He immediately cries out, I'm a man of unclean lips. My words are tainted, blasphemous even. And the people that I live with, they talk the same way, using words that corrupt and desecrate. But then in the following verse, in verses 6 and 7, we're told that one of these creatures, one of these angels, these seraphs, they lift a hot coal and touch it to his lips. Your guilt is gone. Your sin is wiped out. And Isaiah's guilt and shame, they're symbolically burnt away through that hot coal placed on his lips. And he's forgiven. It's only after this experience of being cleansed, of being accepted, that Isaiah is able to respond to God's calling with confidence, saying, Here I am, send me. I love this story of Isaiah because just like so many of the other stories we get throughout our scriptures of prophets and leaders being specifically set apart and called by God, we get to see his very human struggle to accept what God has and indeed has chosen him for. I find that to be really relatable because often when we begin to hear that faint whispering of God's call on our lives, we too instinctively turn towards our inadequacies, our imperfections. Surely God can't be calling me. After all, what could I possibly have to offer? I'm just a human being fallible, stammering. How could God want me to care for God's people? How could God want me to carry out God's mission? It's another reason why I love this hymn. Because I don't know if you've noticed it before, but there's actually a question mark inserted in our response to God's recurring question, of whom shall I send? The refrain states, here I am, period. Is it I, Lord? Question mark. And it's this small piece of self-doubt that really makes this hymn ring true for me. Because if we're being completely honest, when God calls us to action, we rarely are primed like that one student, hand in the air, waving, excitingly calling out, here I am, send me. More often, we're that cautious child in the back row, sitting quietly while the question's asked, and only replying when the teacher's eyes finally meet our own. And that's when we finally, sometimes in a whisper, say, is it me? I feel like this feeling of doubt is a natural thing, a human thing, that we're all too aware of our own limitations and missteps so that we think God surely is too. And God is. And yet God continues to call us forward. God continues to await our answer. The story behind this hymn, it was actually written specifically for a Catholic ordination service. The composer, Dan Schutt, is a Roman Catholic and was asked on very short notice to pen a song that would be fitting to be sung during the ordination Mass. He had just 2 days to write the hymn, and during that time he was plagued with doubt, wondering if the words would be good enough or meaningful enough to send off an ordination class of priests into their new role. It was actually because of Schutt's own experiences with self-doubt while writing the song, along with similar experiences shared with him by others, that he decided to change the refrain to mirror that question mark so many of us experience. Is it I, Lord? Question mark or not, at its heart, this hymn is a hymn of transformation. Transformation of us as the singer in hearing and accepting God's call on our lives, but also on a deeper transformation, kind of the whole world it really gets at. In the first stanza, we see God changing darkness into light, saving those who dwell in dark and sin. And in the second stanza, we see that God is breaking people's hearts of stone and instead giving them hearts for love alone. And finally, in that last stanza, we see that God is tending to the poor and the lame, providing them with the finest bread, setting a feast for them. We're invited throughout the song to participate in these transformations of the world, to bear God's light, to shine great love, to spread the good news of God's gospel message. God continuously calls us towards that, to work alongside God in transforming the hearts of people, transforming the world and the systems within it for better, for justice, for peace. It's natural for us to insert a question mark into our response to God. Natural for us to wonder, like Isaiah did, whether we are indeed adequate vessels to pour forth God's grace and mercy and goodness onto God's creation around us. And yet in the midst of that question, God continues to call us. And God continues to provide us with nourishment for the journey, just as the song says, setting a feast for us. But not only that, not only the bread and wine of the communion feast, because God knows that nourishment isn't just a stomach thing, but a heart thing, a soul thing. Finest bread I will provide, till their hearts be satisfied. I will give my life to them. These lyrics remind us that we're nourished with Christ's very life, that we're sustained, that our souls are sustained through the presence of the Spirit within us, that our God, that Christ resides within us. So let us put aside our question marks. Let us rely upon God's call on our lives. Let us reply with confidence and assurance, saying, "Here I am, Lord. Send me." Amen.